Professor Rajiva Wijesinha, distinguished invitees, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me a great pleasure to welcome all of you to the High Commission of Sri Lanka for the interactive session with Rajiva Wijesinha, Member of Parliament. My task here is to introduce Professor Rajiva Wijesinha, Member of Parliament, and also give a brief introduction about what he is going to do today. Professor Rajiva Wijesinha is a Sri Lanka writer in English, distinguished for his political analysis as well as creative and critical work. An academic by profession for much of his work career, he was most recently Senior Professor of Languages at the University of Sabaragamuwa, Sri Lanka. In June 2007, he was appointed as Secretary General of the Sri Lanka Government Secretariat for coordinating the peace process. And in June 2008, he also became concurrently the Secretary to the Ministry of Disaster Management and Human Rights. The Peace Secretariat wound up in July 2009, and in February 2010, he resigned from the ministry as well as the university, as he was a candidate on the national list of the United People's Freedom Alliance in the general election held in April 2010, following which he was appointed a Member of Parliament. He belongs to the Liberal Party of Sri Lanka and has served as its president and leader, and also as Vice President of Liberal International. He is currently the chair of the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats. He has traveled widely, including as a visiting professor on a semester at sea program of the University of Pittsburgh, and has published beyond the first circles, travels in the second and third worlds. Rajiva Wijesinha schooled at St. Thomas College, Mount Lavinia, and won an open exhibition in classics to University College, Oxford, when he was 16 years old. After his first degree, which also led as an MA in 1977, he moved to Corpus Christi College, Oxford, as E.K. Chambers student and obtained B.Phil degree in English, followed by PhD in 1979 on the subject of women and marriage in the early Victorian novel. The thesis was subsequently published by the University Press of America under the title Androgynous Trollope. He taught briefly at the University of Peradeniya. He was the first Sri Lankan writer resident in the country whose works have been translated into an European language. In 2001, he served as a consultant to the Ministry of Education to initiate the introduction of English medium education in the state sector. He was also academic consultant to the Sri Lanka Military Academy. Professor Wijesinha serves as president at the editorial board of the journal Commonwealth Literature. He is currently a Member of Parliament and advisor to the President on reconciliation. His topic today for the talk is reconciliation in the context of Channel 4 allegations. During his talk, he will deal adequately on the ongoing reconciliation process in Sri Lanka. He will also discuss the Darusman Report, the content of the book titled The Cage by Gordon Weiss, and of course on Channel 4 allegations. Professor Wijesinha will speak for about 40 minutes. You know the professors will warm up only after 20 minutes. And this will follow by question and answer session that will last for another 20 minutes. We will wind up these proceedings closer to 8 p.m. as he has another engagement by that night. Without further ado, I have a pleasure on inviting Professor Rajiva Wijesinha to speak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamza. I should have cut down the introduction, though. The last few months have seen an astonishing spate of attacks on the Sri Lankan government. These began with the publication of the Darusman Report by 3 individuals tasked to advise the UN Secretary General on accountability, but who sat in judgment instead on the Sri Lankan state and its armed forces. And immediately, those who had in any case been attacking the government previously began to use this as a tool. That episode was followed by a book by a man called Gordon Weiss, and then a film aired on Channel 4, all of which added to the impression that there was a mass of evidence against the Sri Lankan government. But in fact, many of you would have noticed that the allegations repeated themselves and built on each other. For instance, many elements in the report were repeated in Gordon Weiss's book, and the only detailed allegations in the report were based on the pictures shown in Channel 4. I have responded in detail to these allegations in some detail in various documents, and I have brought some copies of this for any of you who are interested. It's called See No Good, Hear No Good, and Speak No Good, The Perversity of the Darusman Panel. And I'm afraid there are 24 essays in it, so it's a bit of tough reading, but it just looks at each separate episode, questions of hospitals, questions of rape, and so on, and looks at them individually with, I hope, adequate evidence. And in one sense, we should be grateful to these characters since they have made clear the necessity to tell the real story as it happened. The Presidential Task Force on Resettlement has produced a book, which I think copies have been sent to you, which tells the whole story of the saving, the rescue of the people, and also how they were resettled. And the Ministry of Defense is producing its own version, again belated on the way in which the operation was conducted. And it's remarkable reading, I can assure you, because I don't think any country has really done so much with so much care. What they don't do is answer the allegations directly, which I can understand, because I think to dignify the report by that sort of approach by government would be a mistake. But I think it's up to us then to look at the facts, ask questions, and try to deal with these correctly. But we have also got to bear in mind that people believe what they want to believe. Attacks will continue from people who refuse to look at evidence. If a report by the Secretary General ignored the evidence of the senior UN personnel on the ground and instead relied on a few who had been repudiated previously by their seniors, you have to recognize that rationality has nothing to do with it. Political and emotional considerations will continue to trump evidence. But we should point out forcefully the major errors in the campaign. With regard to Channel 4, it should be noted that they, like many other media outfits, were permitted into Sri Lanka early in 2009. Contrary to the idea that it was a war without witnesses, we invited the media in, and most outfits were quite fair. These continue to operate in Sri Lanka, including the BBC. I mean, I have my differences with the BBC on occasion, but compared to Channel 4, they are heaven. And certainly several Indian agencies did a great job. Our view was that having the media around was a positive factor, and this was correct in that the reporting from the ground assuaged feelings in India where extremists were anxious to mislead the people of Tamil Nadu, but fortunately the politicians at the centre in Delhi are much more intelligent than the politicians in Britain sometimes, so they looked at the evidence, and the people of India were not misled before the election of 2009. But several British outfits were determined to falsify. The Times engaged in a particularly vicious campaign, which another British journalist explained to me as arising from its association with New Labour. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I was confidently told this by a particular British journalist here. And we now know for a fact, courtesy of the Americans, what we long suspected, that David Miliband's approach was for electoral advantage. The Guardian produced several erroneous reports, but only when a stringer called Gethin Chamberlain wrote, and the regular Guardian correspondent told me once he's not our correspondent. his stories had often to be corrected, though he flatly refused to correct the most outrageous of them when he claimed that 11 women had been found with their throats cut. When I met him, he confessed that there was no basis for this. And I said, sure, not one woman? No, he said, no basis at all. And his source could not be trusted. I had the impression that this was a junior UN person. And now, having studied the rest of his reports, all of which in that period carry a correction the next day. The UN said, sorry, it wasn't the UN, it was a person in the UN. I believe this was Gordon Weiss, because the only person he quoted by name was Gordon Weiss early on, and then after that he mentioned no names, but kept talking about an anonymous UN source. Channel 4, however, given the medium, was even more dramatic. From the start, it seemed there was some strange element to this, and their team was soon asked to leave. So later that year, they produced the first aggressive attack on Sri Lanka in the form of a brief clip shown in August 2009. They refused to allow the High Commission to see this in advance. They did not show anyone the video they had received. They even refused to give it to the UN Special Rapporteur, who got another version. Though he didn't admit to this, it was his experts who wrote that they got a video, not from Channel 4, but a video different in some particulars, supplied by an outfit called Journalists for Democracy in Sri Lanka. The only member of this outfit I know is a man called Sunanda Deshapriya, who would turn up at Geneva in attempts to discredit the Sri Lankan government. The last time I saw him there, that's when he confirmed that he was involved with Journalists for Democracy, he kept quiet because I took photocopies of the article in the Sunday Leader, no friend of the Sri Lankan government, which detailed Sunanda Deshapriya's financial irregularities. The Centre for Polity Alternatives, another seminal critic of government, had to publicly disown him. They had collected money which they'd given to him, which he'd then run away with. So the fact that he was then involved in the group that was supplying different copies of this video to different people suggests something suspicious. The video itself had flaws, we pointed out, some of which were removed in the second version sent to the UN. But its experts did confess there were some problems, though they said that by and large the video is authentic. One of the problems was a moving leg, which was supposed to belong to a dead body. But this extremely competent video expert claimed that he could not be sure that the person was dead. He might have been just drunk or asleep. The word used is inebriated, and I think it takes a great stretch of imagination to assume that there's a man who's drunk while people are being shot through the head all around him, and he doesn't wake up if he was asleep. And don't forget, he's shot with no silencers because the sound is also there. So the performance of the experts left so much to be desired that it seemed almost a godsend. And remember this, that for over a year, this was the only claim that there was evidence to suggest that some people in the Sri Lankan forces had committed crimes. I'm one of those who thinks that we shouldn't immediately say, no one in the Sri Lankan force committed crimes. It is possible. These things have to be recognized. But we need to have evidence. And for over 12 months, the only evidence produced was this, what I call this drunk video from Channel 4. Nothing else for 12 months. But a year later, to coincide with the visit of the President to England, Channel 4 came out with another video. This was also strange in that the same UN experts, while claiming that the longer video explained some discrepancies, now confessed that the video had clearly been edited. This was denied at first. The editing included transposing segments so that what was filmed first appeared third. This explained the strange phenomenon. I remember when I first saw the video, I said, it's very strange. It begins with 16 bodies, which goes down to 4. Every time you look, a body has vanished. But the reason is very simple. They had edited it backwards, so that the first thing came third and the third thing came first. Right? The fifth section, the experts say, one says this was filmed at a different time, another says, no, it was filmed at a different place. Now, the reasons are so obscure. It's possible that there is a good explanation for this, but I think the onus is on people who produce a mad video to explain why it's so mad. You know, it's not on the people watching it to say, yes, this is probably a true video, and we don't know why it was transposed in editing. But the onus should be on the people who make the video to explain why they actually edited it in a mad fashion. Right? They continue to claim that the shooting was done on mobile phones, though one of them pointed out that an optical zoom had been used at one point, which is a device it seems you do not find on mobile phones. Incidentally, Channel 4 refused to give the UN any more information about the video, so this time it provided them with the video that was shown. And the experts themselves say we can't be sure about what we are talking about because Channel 4 did not answer the questions we asked. Of course, as you know, most people don't read reports. No? They look at the headlines. Headline is, by and large, video true. So then, video is true. Now again, with brilliant timing to coincide with the UN Human Rights Council meeting in Geneva, Channel 4 produced another film. They absolutely refused to share the material with us, which makes a mockery of the claim that they want us to investigate and bring to justice those responsible for crimes. Their refusal to provide the evidence suggests that their agenda is different, as is indeed obvious from other problems that have been pointed out, namely that the film mixes up a range of shots, some of them obviously authentic, and uses these to make sweeping allegations which are not substantiated. I think a sharp analysis was what was going on was provided in the Sunday Times a couple of weeks back. And today we met a British MP who actually pointed out 4 flaws in this video. And there is perhaps little more to say, except to note that we will have to live with this type of sensationalism for a while yet. But for those of us keen on reconciliation, we need to understand what Channel 4 is up to and why. Given the vicious nature of the attack, it is clear that it is serving a particular agenda which obviously has nothing to do with morality given its own record over the years. The support it has given for militarism when it benefits Britain, and its refusal to allow us a fair chance to discuss issues raised. As when they refused to see me after the first film shown, until they were ashamed to do so by a comment I made on the BBC early morning program. This was in 2009. This time too, Mr. Hamza rang up against his better judgment because he didn't want to engage with them. I said I'd love to sort of talk to them. Oh, no, they can't talk to me because I'd rubbish them. But that agenda can be understood in terms of what has already happened, in terms of providing an excuse for even more emotional attacks on us by the remnants of the LTT propaganda outfits. Even before the program was shown, letters were sent to many politicians, including even local councillors, and we can see the results of this in the reactions of a few. Though, as I said, others having seen the program have noted that it was quite one-sided. More insidiously, and I think this is the key, the program was designed to stop active involvement in Sri Lanka of those members of the Tamil community who, free from LTT pressure, were wondering what they could do to improve the situation of their brethren at home. And it is this polarizing that we must combat, because that would be the most helpful way of reviving the old LTT agenda. It is more important ever than before, while roundly condemning the tactics of the divisive groups, to be even more conciliatory with regard to the vast majority of the Tamil people, and to make it clear that we will go on with rebuilding the country together. In this regard, let me mention some of the positive things that have been achieved recently and urge your support to take things further. First and foremost, we have begun taking practical action to overcome the divisiveness caused by insensitive language policies. As you know, Sinhala was made the only official language in 1956, but Tamil was also made an official language in 1987, long overdue, but the introduction of compulsory bilingualism in the school system took place only in the 90s. With now, introduced by this government, regulations that make knowledge of the other official language mandatory for new recruits to the public sector. Much more, however, needs to be done. That is also why we are reforming our education system, encouraging private institutions and input into tertiary education and skills training. strengthening the English medium option that was introduced in 2001, promoting opportunities for youngsters to meet and realize that they have much more in common than they had previously thought. And one of the great benefits of the openness now for travel is that kids from the north and south can go up and down and visit each other. But much more still requires to be done, and I hope that the diaspora will continue to contribute to educational exchanges, to endow scholarships to your old schools, to support training for youngsters who were deprived, and in particular the former combatants who had to abandon schooling early when they were conscripted. Another area in which reform has begun but needs to be fast-forwarded is recruitment to the public sector and in particular the security forces. It is often forgotten that minorities continue to occupy high positions in the armed forces and in particular in training establishments because they were relatively safe there from the particular animosity evinced against them by the LTT. So that, for instance, a lot of the leading figures in the military academies were Tamil. Because they couldn't go on active service, they would have been killed. Certainly in the last few years, the recruitment has been less. One reason is with regard to the military security considerations were involved, including, as you know, the targeting by the LTT of Tamil-speaking officers, even during the so-called ceasefire, when intelligence was decimated. Military intelligence was just killed by the LTT, especially after they managed to get hold of names of people after the incident at Athrugiriya. But there was still continuing recruitment in some areas, including to the cadet corps, even during the conflict, for education as well as cadet training. Sadly, I was told the Ministry of Education seems to have called a halt to the Ministry of Defense from continuing with this program, which I thought was an excellent program, because it had facilitated the continuing commissioning of Tamil officers even while the fighting was going on. This is particularly important because we need to involve all our citizens in security activity. You see, we need to remember that though the discrimination of the 60s and 70s led to the initial desire by many Tamils to leave Sri Lanka, this process was made worse, but what I believe was state-sponsored violence against Tamils on 3 distinct occasions following the election of the 77 government. Surprisingly, or perhaps not surprisingly, that government continued to be in favor with Western countries that have now discovered a commitment to human rights. Most startlingly, it continued to be supported even by the Tamil elite in Colombo, who were more concerned about class than race. That only changed with the attacks on Tamils in Colombo too in 1983. But previously, the violence unleashed on less privileged Tamils in 1977 in a few areas, and then on many more in 1981, had laid the groundwork for the deep emotions we see in so many expatriates and which we must try to understand. So I understand and sympathize with those who left our shores in that period. But those attacks, the burning of the Jaffna Public Library, the systematic assaults of July 1983, have not been repeated. Nevertheless, tensions did continue, and I believe that ensuring our security forces are multi-ethnic is vital for restoring confidence. I should note that the police continue to recruit from all communities, and even at the height of the war, 700 odd officers passed out from the training school established at Kalladi in the eastern province. But applications were few given fear of the LTT. Fortunately, this changed after the LTT in Sri Lanka was destroyed and a few thousand applied. A couple of batches of several hundred each have now been trained and appointed, in particular in stations to the north. But this is not enough. We need to expand this considerably. Same applies to the public sector. We believe there will be greater interest now that the threats that confronted so many bright youngsters are over. But we need to enhance educational opportunities, especially in areas from which there was never much recruitment to the public sector, given the neglect of education in those areas, in particular the Vanni and the East. So I'm delighted that the present government agent for Kilinochchi is the first person from that area to have risen to such a high position in the public service. You have to remember that although there was a high proportion of Tamils in the public service earlier on, because of the very good education systems they had in the Jaffna, this didn't apply to Kilinochchi, Mullathievu, Mana, Vavuniya, and much of the eastern province. She had been deputy in Batticaloa when the district was recovering, and her appointment as a government agent is recognition of her commitment. So I can only hope that the efforts to resurrect the LTT abroad and to continue to argue for separatism will not blight the ready willingness of youngsters in Sri Lanka to take their proper role in the government sector. But we need also to recognize that the orthodoxies of the 60s and 70s, when statist socialism was a problem so that everyone's share of the pie was reduced, have given way to the understanding that the engine of growth needs to be the private sector. Though the excesses of crony's capitalism, that was the alternative in much of Asia in the 70s to state socialism, must be avoided, and we must continue with and develop services that ensure equality of opportunity, health, education, infrastructure, utilities. We need to promote much more initiative, much more investment, much more support for entrepreneurship. And in this regard, I'd like to mention an initiative undertaken with some of my decentralized budget for the former combatants who were so brutally abused, but in a short period have seemed to adjust into the bright and energetic youngsters they would have been if not forced into combat by the LTT. My initial hope had been to start a primary English training program for the girls, but by the time I got my funds, as you know, government, which should give us our decentralized budget at the beginning of the year, tends to give it to us in August. Okay? The girls had all been released. So my first thought was to say, bring them back, lock them up, hold them, I want to teach them English. But then I thought that's a bit unfair on the girls, let them stay at home. And what we did instead was use the funding for a training program in psychosocial care so that the former combatants can also then apply these skills to kids in that area. And that program, conducted by some experts in London, was concluded successfully, and sufficient funding is now there for follow-up. But we also needed skills training, and in an entrepreneurship development program, over 100 former combatants applied, 30 were selected, were extremely enterprising. You can see some of the details of the event on the Reconciliation website, www.peaceinsrilanka.org. They're the very first articles on the home page. But also I was impressed by their conceptualization skills, because when they were asked to suggest areas for enterprises, 2 groups chose agribusiness, 2 others construction. This fits in well with what government has been planning to make a more productive place of the Vanni, which was neglected for so long by central governments, by the more advanced entrepreneurs of Jaffna, and most shamefully by the LTT. The area is incredibly fertile. With the irrigation schemes now being developed, it will provide abundant harvests. Indeed, even at the height of the war, the paddy harvest was excellent. And government actually purchased stocks from the area for distribution to the displaced, even though we knew that the LTT would commandeer much of the payment. But we must ensure that the inhabitants of the area benefit from their labor and not middlemen. To promote food processing and added value products is essential. We believe the youngsters there can take on the challenge. But it would be helpful if they could be provided with startup funds, and I hope some organizations abroad will think of collecting funds for microcredit schemes for the area. With regard to construction, it must be obvious that with the rebuilding going on, there are opportunities for workers as well as suppliers, but much of this now benefits people from elsewhere. However, it will not take much to build on the vocational training systems already started, while also developing management and accounting skills. And I was delighted that the Ministry of Youth Affairs is working closely together with a very good French NGO called Aid in Action, which does excellent vocational training that includes soft skills, so that the kids can also move on to management, in addition to not only being stuck in what you would call technical jobs. Because in the short term as well as in the long run, we need to empower the people of the area to participate actively in development to ensure an equitable share of the prosperity the country should be moving towards. I think government has done very well in the resettlement process and in providing basic infrastructure, including schools, roads, water, electricity, and better communications. As you're probably aware, of the 300,000 people who were displaced, all but 11,500 are now out of Manic Farm, and those we hope will be resettled in the next 2 months. This is an astonishing achievement in 2 years. It was a massive number, massive job of demining, but concertedly government has managed to take them back and give them the basic requirements. But more needs to be done. It has also restored the local administration, led by extremely experienced government agents, all of them Tamil, some of whom did a superb job even when they had to work in areas controlled by the LTT. So the lady who ran Mulathuvu and supervised the distribution of supplies till just before the conflict ended is now in Jaffna. One of her greatest achievements, I should note, is conducting the ordinary level examination in December 2008 for the displaced. The person who looked after Kilinochchi is now in Mannar. The lady who was in charge of Vavuniya right through the period of conflict is still there, and Kilinochchi looked after, as mentioned by the member of the administrative, born during that, in that area. But while appreciating the work of these senior officials, we can do much better in developing human resources. With regard to the public sector, this is true not only of the North, I should add, because the second and third layers of administration nationwide, given the decline in communication skills and decision-making capacities, are not as capable as the senior officers. But we need to develop community leaders, mechanisms, for instance, for ensuring that the schools have teachers as well as equipment, that in the main hospitals we have midwives and social workers and childcare officials to fill up the cadre positions that are now empty. I did a survey recently of what I would call the care people. Okay, so proper training, better deployment, and more efficient monitoring are essential. But while affirming that government is responsible for ensuring provision, we should develop private-public partnerships which will make things more effective while developing simpler and more accessible structures of both responsibility and accountability. In the ongoing negotiations with Tamil political parties, we need also discuss the establishment of better structures at all levels to ensure empowerment of the people on whose behalf government functions. For too long now, our debates have concentrated on the balance of power between politicians from different areas, whereas we should also be thinking of how power can be exercised effectively at the grassroots with transparency and accountability. For accountability for too long has been to institutions dominated by those who need to account. In place of the confrontational politics of the last couple of decades, we must develop structures that enhance bipartisan approaches to monitoring and policy development. And we have made a start on this with the more healthy relationship now between parties on the standing committees of Parliament. We should also strengthen the role of the consultative committees, and it's good to see members of all parties actively involved in at least some of the committees. I'm also pleased that government has produced proposals with regard to a second chamber based on equal representation for districts or provinces. All parties agree that security matters must be entrusted to a central government, and it's a pity that previously there was no interest in ensuring greater participation. Active involvement of all segments of society in policy issues is essential. We also need to entrench rights as well as responsibilities. The Human Rights Action Plan, which we developed at the Ministry, was held up for some time after the election, but although I was a bit worried it was forgotten, it was then taken up by the Attorney General and it was finalized a couple of months ago and is now before Cabinet. But apart from these pledges, the government should put in place better communication strategies. Much energy is expended on communicating with those who are already appreciative of what is being done, which is important, since no government should exclude its electorate. But it is important to communicate also with those who have doubts, and we have much to do. Distinguished academics have told me we have a good story, but we haven't told it. But where else were nearly 300,000 displaced? In the East, we have actually got things going and things are moving quite well in terms of economic development. We need to do more in the North. Child soldiers finally rescued after years of ineffective efforts to stop this ghastly practice and were given schooling in one of the best schools in Colombo. Orphans have been looked after in established as well as newly constructed institutions and also by schools that have taken on the challenge. Infrastructure has been developed apace, but much more needs to be done in the North. And with the rebuilding of roads and railways, there'll be greater exchange of persons as well as of goods. One of the journalists who has interviewed me began with what seemed a hostile approach, but said in the end there are many matters which are not known abroad. In one sense, it is understandable because media prefers bad news to good. That's unfortunate what people are interested in. But it is our fault that we have not communicated better. Now that the terror and violence in Sri Lanka is over, we must overcome the suspicions that remain. In Australia, I was pleased that one member of a Sinhalese group that had worked hard against LTT propaganda told me after I spoke there that though he found it difficult to trust Tamils, he realized the effort had to be made. And I hope that applies in both ways. I spoke to Tamils there and was pleased that many of them have forgotten the suspicions of the past and want to work together. New Zealand has set up a Sri Lanka Business Council with distinguished businessmen of all communities, and I hope that sort of cooperation will develop elsewhere. But getting over suspicions will be difficult. We in government must need to work concertedly to reassure everybody. And it is vital that those who are abroad, who can remember only the distant past, will not endeavour to revive tensions, but will visit the country and see what they can do to help. The people of Sri Lanka, all over the country, but particularly the north, suffered from terrorism, forced conscription, execution with dissent, deprivation of services. We need to make it clear, if only to assuage the worries of those who watch with concern, we did our best for the civilians who were suffering. It's not known, for instance, that though ICRC recorded its appreciation of the support our Navy extended, that of the near 14,000 people whom the Navy helped to bring down from the conflict area, only 4,500 were wounded. There were a couple of thousand who were sick, but over 7,000 were described by the ICRC as bystanders, which suggests that the numbers for the wounded and therefore the dead were much less than is now commonly alleged. Of course, such matters need to be carefully considered with precise attention to the statistics. This will help to make clear the generally humane way the government operated, as is evident from the written appreciation sent by the UN and the ICRC. We need to do this soon so that those who are genuinely concerned about the Tamil people in Sri Lanka will be able to understand what they went through and help to recompense them for what they suffered. But above all, we should make it clear that the participation of all our citizens, including those of you settled abroad, will prove invaluable in the reconciliation, the rehabilitation, and the rebuilding that we need to swiftly achieve. Thank you.